Hello, Stoned Apes and others who are curious about the healing powers of psychedelic medicines. Welcome to the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm your host, Stuart Preston. Each episode, I talk to another Stoned Ape, somebody who has experienced the transformational powers of psychedelics. In this episode, I had the pleasure of speaking with my good friend, Michael. Michael shared his story of opening up his awareness with mescaline, working through fear, in a meaningful purge with ayahuasca. So please enjoy this episode with Michael. All right, Michael. Well, thank you so much for joining me here on the Stoned Ape Reports. I'm excited to talk to you. I know anybody who's listened to maybe your personal podcast that you've got going may know that you and I are friends. You know, we've met in some unique circumstances and really formed a really good bond. So it means a lot to me to have you here on the podcast and share your story. So welcome, and I look forward to talking to you.
Well, thanks, Stuart. I'm honored to appear on your show. Yes, you appeared on my podcast as well, and we talked about some pretty heavy things. So
we did.
More than willing to return the favor here and tell you some stories about some journeys that I've been on in my life and see how it might be able to help you, your audience, as it helped me.
Perfect. So let's do that then. So obviously, you know, what we talk about is how psychedelics, entheogens have helped us in life. So, you know, why don't you just tell your stories, you know, of what some things that were going on in your life that led you to these medicines and how the medicines helped.
Sure. Tracking back through my story to talk on your podcast, it's actually been kind of fun to like, oh, I remember that time.
Yeah.
I remember that time. But I guess the most impactful thing that keeps coming to mind is when I was 14, turning 15, right around that time, I was going through kind of an awakening in my life. At the time, you know, just like things weren't seeming the same, you know, that kind of a growth thing you do from like adolescent to adult or whatever, where you're like,
yeah,
I was like questioning everything in my life, you know, what's real, what isn't real. And around that time, you know, I was smoking pot, I was, you know, doing whatever drugs. I didn't touch any needles or do any coke or anything that could be addicting. I stayed away from that, mainly recreational.
right.
Then mescaline came around and we did a hit here and there and got the trip, the buzz feel from it, you know, not buzz as far as high like weed is, you know, but you know, that vibration, you know, but we were using it recreationally. So it was like, well, you know, what the hell was that? You know?
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, okay, that kind of was like going through a car wash or something. That was kind of weird and uncomfortable. I was kind of looking to maybe hallucinate or something, but
right.
But then, you know, kids being kids, this new, stronger 24-hour yellow sunshine mescaline came around, and oh well, that last one didn't work. Let's get 3.
Wow.
So we each got 3, and we went to see the movie Creepshow, which is a spooky, scary flick about, you know, people getting buried with their heads above the water in the sand, and the waves coming in at night, and being on 3 hits of mescaline, that wasn't fun.
Yeah.
But it kind of shook my reality, I found. I was like, I was torn because I knew what I was seeing on the screen wasn't reality, but part of me was saying it was, and I should be scared out of my wits over it. And I was like, wait a minute. So I'm torn inside, and I'm like having this wrestling match back and forth. Like, all right, is somebody really drowning on the screen? You know, so I'm like going through this wrestling match.
Yeah.
But what that did, and the more important part about what I said about that wrestling match is that wrestling match didn't stop there. It lasted, I'm not kidding, for a year. Because
really?
With those 3 hits of mescaline, I cracked open something like some kind of new level of awareness. I know it now as some higher state of consciousness where I could witness things without emotion, so to speak, not be connected to it and get information from it. And literally, Stuart, for the next year, I felt like every song on the radio, especially for the first month, I'll just focus on the first month, the days after, any song that came on the radio, what was being sung on the radio I felt was being sung directly to me as a message of some corrective action in my life that I needed to take. I mean, it was like, this is what's going on in your life, and you shouldn't, you know, and it wasn't like an order, like you shouldn't. It wasn't mean. It was just like this awareness of like, oh, that's something I shouldn't be doing. That goes against who I am. So then came the shedding process, and this lasted a solid 3 or 4 months and really throughout an entire year of just like examining things within me that weren't sitting right with me, like a relationship I had with somebody that every time I would talk to them, I would leave with some kind of icky feeling or something. I knew I had to go back and figure out what that was, whether it be within me or deal with whatever issue it was, because I felt I was starting, I realized a stronger sense of myself. I realized I was putting up with a lot of stuff, from
Hmm.
people, dealing with difficult situations for people in an unhealthy fashion, taking on too much weight. So just went to shedding of like these things that didn't serve me anymore, it felt. Now just these things just kept falling away for like a year. It was mind blowing, Stuart.
And it was actual shedding. It wasn't just thinking to yourself, "Oh, I should get rid of this." You were actually getting rid of them.
I was throwing things in my bedroom in the garbage that I've been
Wow.
holding on to for years because, oh, I remember that reminded me, oh my God, I remember that was a horrible thing. No wonder I was holding on to that object. And then I
Hmm.
cry, and then I just cry and cry and cry over this, and then I just threw it away. It's like, you don't serve me anymore. And I just
Hmm.
kept shedding these things. That started 14, 15. And that was like my first, I mean, like I said, and that was a year, and I'm sure that kept impacting me for forever because the lessons learned in that initial impact, the realizations of all the negative patterns I was following and the
Yeah.
things I was allowing the people to do to me, just not because they were malicious, although some were, there are some mean people in this world, but just the everyday, healthy boundaries that you allow people to allow to slip, and all of a sudden, there isn't one. You're doing all their chores or
Hmm.
whatever, and
Hmm.
it's like, I need to like recenter myself. So really, I went through life and, unfortunately for me, I didn't learn all the lessons of life. I married too young. We had a couple kids, we had a great marriage for the longest time, and just, we were too young. We grew apart, so we were unhappy. And that's when I picked up drinking really heavily.
Hmm.
Prior to that, I had been drinking sociably, to fit in and all that, and life of the party and all that. But when I started to realize I was unhappy in the marriage, and this was late, it was a 16-year marriage, I realized I was now, and after that, I realized I was leaning a bit too much on the booze, It
Hmm.
was allowing me to just numb what I was feeling instead of actually feeling it. So it was around that time I was about 38. And although this isn't directly related to a trip, so to speak, this is directly related to a trip because the same mechanism was pulled. I was experiencing a tremendous amount of fear in my marriage about thinking about breaking up and having 2 kids. And I was just overwhelmed with fear. And I was just drowning in my fear. And I remember when I was on that original LSD trip and subsequent like crystal tea trips and all, it kept pointing out my fear as my main blocker. So me, and this is a please don't try this at home example of trying to do it without meds. I'm like, I'm going to tackle my fear. I had already taken scuba diving lessons. On my 5th dive, I went to 180 feet deep. I was petrified of the dark, by the way, and confined spaces. Petrified, absolutely petrified. I went down to 90 feet of deep water in pitch black water with a group of dive masters and a bunch of other people doing a night dive checkout.
Hmm.
We turned our lights off for 15 minutes. I knew that was going to force me to face my fears. It's like, you do this or you're going to die. You can't go all the way up, you'll get the bends. You can't sink to the bottom because who knows, some monster will get you. Who knows?
Hmm.
But it's 140 feet deep. You don't want to descend quickly there. So I knew. And as soon as they like put the command to turn the lights off, I went to sheer panic. But in that cycle, it was the same exact cycle I find that I go through when I use hallucinogenics. And that is, it forced me to look at what I was fearing in that moment. And when I did, and I surrendered to that fear, and as we know it, go into the medicine,
Hmm.
this 43-degree Fahrenheit water turned warm. I was calm. Minutes later, the lights went on, and I was no longer ever afraid of the dark or confined spaces.
Wow.
But take that now and say, okay, how does that apply to an LSD trip? Well, I'll take you to maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago now. I'm a business coach, so I talk to a lot of people throughout the day. A lot of my coaching, I would say it's like 75% therapy, on
Hmm.
superficial business therapy. You'll be fine. I know it's a tough change, but you'll be okay. That type of therapy. I mean that loosely.
Yes. Hmm.
But I do a lot of planning sessions, and this one woman I know, on the way out, she just said, "Hey, have you thought about Aya?" And she wasn't even talking about me, and I've never heard of Aya before. She wasn't talking to me. I've never heard of it, but AWA went off in my head, and I'm like, and I didn't let it go. I'm like, well, whatever that is, I need to look that up because I know this woman and she seems to have her act together. So I'm going to figure out what that is. So
Hmm.
I went home and I looked up Aya, and it quickly came up as ayahuasca. I quickly opened up Facebook right away, typing in Aya, popped up on my screen. There's a local one, happens to be within 3 weeks. I signed up and went. It happened that quickly from the mere
Wow.
mention of somebody to looking at it. And it wasn't until after I signed up, paid my money, that I thought, wow, I better look into what this is. you know,
Yeah.
but remember, I went to 90 feet of darkness to try to figure out my fear. So I just kind of
Yeah.
jumped into things.
Yes.
And I knew, but I had something inside of me that said it was right. It was like that medicine called me from the other side of the room in a conversation I wasn't even being involved with. And from what I know from my now 6 journeys with Aya, it absolutely was calling to me
Mm.
because it had me do all those things as soon as I got home, and it had me sign up for it without even knowing what it is. It had me look up the things that only concern me, and that is, what the heck does purging mean, and what can I expect? Because it sounds like it's going to be pretty ferocious,
Right.
And then I went, and I was nervous, kind of nervous, like when I first get ready to come onto your podcast here, like like those inner jitters, like you're going into an interview, but you're not.
Right.
But I wasn't afraid.
Hmm.
I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel like I was there under my complete power. I felt like I was following something there. And I went totally alone, didn't know anybody. There were maybe 30 people in the circle, including facilitators, went up, and then the serving started. It took a tremendous amount of time. They had to go around and talk to all the people. And they went around and did the hape, and they did the tobacco sauce, and they get not tobacco sauce, tobacco sniff, and all the things to get you ready. And then they serve the first drink, and they wait 90 minutes, and you can go back up. And I go back, and I have my list of 75,000 intentions written down of what my demands from this ceremony
Yeah.
be like, and how perfect this is going to be. Give me all the answers to every single thing I expect from it. And it took probably about it took 7 doses total, but it took until the fifth dose for the medicine to finally say, when are you going to put that list down and pay attention to me?
Uh,
Because I hadn't purged, and
yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
around me was like, you know what it's like. I mean, everybody, I won't go into description. I don't need to tell people on your call, but or on their podcast, all these people are doing their purging, and they're yawning, and they're doing all the things that, the medicine is supposed to be. But I knew I was blocked, and,
Yeah.
and I could just feel it. I wasn't allowing something to happen. So I went up and talked to the facilitator, and he said, he just said, "Hey, where is it? What does it feel like? Go into it. Tell me what the emotion is." And then he handed me a crystal, said, "Hold it on the spot. You can take this back for the ceremony." And like magic, this thing just washed through me, and then out came the
Hmm.
meds. It didn't hit me as hard as the others. And I've done some shrooms. I haven't done it medicinally. I've done it, formerly recreationally. It
Hmm.
did have that kind of low harmonic drag to me on the way in. So I knew the medicine was there, and then my temperature started to change. I got cold and hot, so I'm like, okay, we're there. But I didn't. The first time I ever did it, I didn't know how to go into the medicine. Not really. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how to dig in. And it took a while. It took till like 2 a.m. And finally I'm like, I'm not going to let this, I'm not going to not, I came here for the reason, so I'm walking outside and I'm not shouting, but in my head I'm shouting at like, the sky in
Yeah.
anger for this medicine not working. And then all of a sudden in my stomach came this, I mean, as deep down in the stomach as you can get, came this like, not a sting. It just kind of like a hot burn.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, here we go.
Wow.
And I knew from, what they tell you before the ceremony is to go right into that and don't run from that, go into it. So I'm like, okay. And as I'm focusing on what was maybe, a golf ball size black dot visually in the
Mm-hmm.
gut, it started to expand. As I focus on it and breathe into it, like they say, my brain said, get that bucket ready. And now I'm out in the middle of nowhere, in a desert. I'm outside and then out it came. And I had, by the way, I had followed the protocol so strictly. I hadn't eaten for a week. I was limiting my drink and I only drank sips until then. So I'm telling you, there was nothing for me to purge out that
Right.
way. But lo and behold, there is. Apparently, in everybody, we carry a whole bunch of toxic things that we're not supposed to be carrying, and that's what I learned. And
Hmm.
I won't get too descriptive, but
Yeah. Yeah.
there was what came out as soon as it came out, the message from Mother Ayahuasca that was very clear as soon as it came out. She said, get away from this thing immediately, get rid of it. And I know they said they give it back to the earth, so I went under a tree, threw it, and I do kind of like a waving of your hand to cut the negative cord from your bucket, and then I went and wrote some bucket out, and I just like, I ran from that thing. It
Hmm.
felt, it felt dark, even after the bush started to feel dark, and I was like, I need to get away from here. So whatever it was something I needed to get out, and out it came. So
And that's what you purged. You purged this thing,
yeah.
and La Madre said, "Get away from it."
Absolutely. Move now. Like that. It was like,
Yeah.
move now. And it was almost, I didn't even have a choice, Stuart. It was like, as soon as I threw it, I could feel almost like a dense energy moving towards me. And she was moving me as she was saying, move now, as my legs were pivoting. And I pivoted, along with her nudge and
Mm-hmm.
started to go wash this bucket out and get back under the protection of the, the prayers and the good wishes of everybody in there, away from whatever it was I just got rid of.
Hmm.
Because I knew. And I say you, like, I just knew in me, whatever it was, I had to get it. I had to move away, and it
Yeah.
was validated by my mother,
Do you, by what
by
do you
Mother
have any
Ayahuasca.
idea what it was you got rid of?
That wasn't clear the first night. That took, because that was my first experience,
Mm-hmm.
and what I've learned is I just go with the flow with the meds when I go now. I don't, I'll go in with very loose intentions of like, please don't kill me, or something like that. Real general ask, just don't let me die tonight.
Yeah.
Because I've learned the messages are just going to come, and I just let them flow.
Yeah.
And for me, it's about the integration time. I'll
Hmm.
take them in, I'll let them flow, but I find when I try to align them with what I was intending, it takes away from the true flow of information coming from the mother for me.
Yeah.
So I set them loosely as like a general statement, and I just kind of leave those intentions behind and just listen and just surrender into the medicine in a more clear stated mind instead of trying to
Mm-hmm.
compare and contrast to what my recommendations were, right?
Yeah.
So that was the first night, and the second night wasn't it was intense. It only took 2 doses for me to purge. I felt strongly that I knew the pathway to the medication. I could just feel like the line. If I could close my eyes, I could feel the line, if you can understand the visual of the path to the medicine. And I could still feel her alive because I had just done a ceremony, hours before,
Mm-hmm.
and had 7 doses fine total. So I was I was ready to go. So, I stuck around, helped clean up and, clear the juju, bad energy out of the whole dome. And we got set up, went up, got the first dose. And I asked him right off the bat, I don't want to do 7. Give me a banger. And he's like, all right. So he gave me like this, 3-time dose, and off I went. And I changed the order of my hape because I realized doing hape after I take the drink opens up my third eye, which allows me, to crack open my chakra and get full energy flow. So, I'm starting to learn how to use the medications, right? You have all these rapes and hapes available at these ceremonies, and I have a whole suite of them. I'm actually looking at them right now. It's like multiple tubes of 3 different 4 hapes, and I know how I feel with each one. I know the state of mind I'm able to achieve with each one. These medicines are just miraculous. So into the second ceremony, it took me, I needed to go up because I thought I just needed a kicker. I feel I needed to talk to the facilitator more than I needed a second one. But after 90 minutes, went up for a quick poke. And as soon as I got back, I got in a position that I see some of the, the more veterans getting into, kind of like a dog stance on all fours, and just lean over the bucket, and just out it came. I mean,
Yeah.
and I hadn't eaten, through the day. All I had was water. And then
Hmm.
again, this one was more of a, you found a path, where these toxins are in your body. And then all I'll say as far as anything is clarity is, it was very clear that toxins were coming out. I'll just say.
Wow.
And it was a flush. I remember after the second one, I was in a different space. Everything looked more clear. It's like I could see the colors more vibrantly. They just jumped out at me more.
Yeah.
And when I was walking, the sand felt like it was holding me up. And what was different is I felt more of my own weight on my heels. And I thought to myself, I don't know the last time I ever walked so slowly that I could feel all my weight on a heel. And I thought,
Hmm.
I'm 48 years old, and I'm just now starting to slow down. And this medicine's allowing me to see that the world goes much slower than what the speed I was moving.
Wow. And so when you came out of all this, I mean, that's an amazing experience, and obviously La Madre helped you purge something very toxic, whether physically and or emotionally.
Hmm.
Um, how has that whole experience played in your everyday life away from that ceremony?
It's changed my life, frankly. Literally, since that, I've probably had 3 or 4 different times where I think I've totally reconfigured my whole life.
Hmm.
Just anything that happens that I find, I'm just able to see. I'm moving so slowly through life now. The speed in which I feel that I'm supposed to be moving, like everybody's supposed to be moving, just so slowly now. My awareness, when I look at things, I'm not reactive anymore. I don't feel like everything's a fire and I have to run and put it out.
Yeah.
Oh no, the child needs a bottle. Well, sure, okay. I don't have to dive out of the chair and run. I can actually walk there, feel my weight on my heels, stay centered and present. But I wasn't. I was feeling very rushed. So it's allowed me to slow down and see things. And what it allowed me to see is a lot of patterns that I had. And like I told you from my first experience, it showed me a lot of patterns as well. The medicine has allowed me to have some level of awareness and higher state of consciousness, if you will, of what my impact of every word and every action that I take has on literally everybody around me. And I just, when I started to feel that, and when I started to feel that in my heart, I would walk around and I would say something and I would just try to watch. And of course, if you go in a room and say, I love you, I mean, you know what that does to a room, but imagine when you're a little angry and you walk in a room and say, holy crap. I mean, you literally change that whole room. That's a minor
Mm-hmm.
example, but my little pattern behaviors of how I react when this happens, those are becoming more clear. When I see them, I put a little thought to it. I say, all right, I realize what I just did. Even if, and I'll apologize on the spot. Look, I seem to get caught up in something you say. I got reactive. I apologize. And when I say that on the spot, first, I feel it fixes what happened between them and I in live real time. So I don't have to circle back later if it's appropriate, right? I mean, it's not every case where you want to do that. But that kind of smooths it out. And if it's not appropriate at the time, I take it back with me because I put my mind to it, and then I'll meditate on it and say, what caused you, Michael, to snap or to
Mm-hmm.
snap at this person? It's like, oh, well, all right, I was having a bad. Why were you having a bad day? And go back to it. It's like, all right, so you lost your center of balance at 9 a.m. because when you reacted, it was 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So it allowed me to start seeing that and start rolling some of those back and have less of a negative impact, and hopefully more of a positive impact on people around me.
Yeah. When with ayahuasca, set and setting are pretty much part of the ceremony. Um, do you have any thoughts on the difference between and I'm not sure I even like the words good and bad, but a
Right,
good
right.
trip and a bad trip. Um, Even when you go into these ceremonies, how do you work on your own mindset? Going into this to try to have the experience you want without trying to control it, right? Because one thing I
Right,
can sense that you're saying is you got to let go, you got to let the whole thing flow. So you don't really walk in there, although I have walk in there and say, here's how it's going to go, here's what I need to learn,
right.
right? How do you set that up? Like, what advice would you give, or what was your lesson on how to
Yeah.
really open up and learn the lessons from La Madre or from the medicine?
First, it's all about set and setting, period. If that's not working, don't do it. If it doesn't
Hmm.
feel right, walk away from it. Now, and you say good and bad, every experience you get something out of it, whether it was a good experience or bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think to a certain degree we do have some control over that based on how the mood we go in with as well. But really, if you have a choice between A and B ceremony, look at the type of people that go there. Is there 40 people at that ceremony compared to one that has 10 and doesn't go over 10, and it's people that they know a little bit more? You'll have a more intimate setting and you can get more personal, or
Mm-hmm.
are you looking for a 40-person setting where you can just, not that you can't do an intimate setting, but bark like a dog, and you don't have to feel like, you have to be embarrassed by your actions because, it's people that you know. But what I find in more of an open setting is you get more of a spill of everybody's energy and as you know from the circle, you're all sharing the same experience.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have 40 people, it changes the alchemy of the entire dome or room or wherever you're doing it. And you have to manage that energy along with everybody else. So I was a little overwhelmed with the larger ceremony, so I'm preferring to stick. And it's not that I won't go back to the large. I'll just know what to expect and go in with the set and setting mindset that this is what it is. Here's what I can expect and understand this. And that's kind of a lesson right there that no matter what setting you go into, the intentions are that it's going to be a good one, but one person coming in there can actually create, one person playing music off key or something in there can really get to you. So bad,
Mm-hmm.
that can come, but it's really, I found, especially over the last time that I went, I was able to pick something up that I thought would be a negative at the beginning and work with it before the ceremony began and just kind of let it go and just know that it's going to be there and I can't control it. And it did help ultimately. So you can, in that regard, control the setting,
Mm-hmm.
because it's what you allow. If you walk into a setting that, you've heard is beautiful and it has the best feminine energy and it's exactly what you're looking for because everybody's so nice. Oh, but they have that style quilt is the first thing that you see when you walk in. You're not going to have a good day. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a certain amount that you're in control of yourself.
Yeah, so even with a ceremony like that, you still have a lot of control over how you experience that and setting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I know that's been proving out each time. And each time when I go in that mindset, I realize I can't control the container. I can't control the room, but I do realize that my energy has an influence on the room. And I'm allowed to protect myself. I can step out of the room. I can
Hmm.
keep my head down. I can do those things. So that's always there. These ceremonies are always really safe in that regard. If you need your space, they don't bother you.
Nice. And all this amazing work that you've done, here you are on a public podcast talking about it, but have you talked to friends and family and other acquaintances about this? And have you experienced any stigma as a result? Has anybody said, "What are you, crazy, Michael?" Or, "You're going to go crazy and lose your mind," or, anything like that? Have you experienced, first of all, do you talk to other people about this openly in your normal, quote, normal life? And if so, have you experienced that stigma at all?
The marijuana is a gateway drug stigma. Yeah, all right. No, I know what you're asking, Stuart, and I, I'm careful about who I tell. I'm in a corporate setting, so I
Hmm.
don't wear it like a badge of honor at work.
Yeah,
Well, people know me. I mean, I'm the hippie coach. I mean, everybody knows me, and I doubt anybody has any question. And I've been approached by numerous people, and I have the conversation with them. The stigma, as you call it, is breaking down even in corporate worlds. I've been inviting friends and bringing friends from the corporate world to these settings.
nice.
And it's not. I mean, trauma is within everybody. It doesn't matter where we come from. These
Yeah,
circles, I'm just so amazed when we get around these circles and I see people from everywhere. Different states are coming in, different countries are even coming in. It's just phenomenal. We all get together to heal like that.
yeah, that's fantastic of you. Um, so what else? I think that's I think we're getting to the end of this. Is there anything else you want to share? Do you want to tell us about your podcast, your practice, what you're up to these days, or anything else about medicinal journeys?
Well, I'll just touch a little bit since you bring up the podcast.
Yeah,
It's called Heyoka Coach, HeyokA Coach. You can find me on the socials just by searching that.
I'll put a link
Really,
to it too.
okay, thank you. I started this podcast because it's kind of what I've been talking about throughout the show here with Stuart is all of those journeys that I've been taking since I've been 14, I've been doing them alone. I had zero people able to help me. So,
Hmm.
and I'm not talking about the medicinal aspect. I'm talking about the mental transformative aspect of it and what it's like to go through an awakening and all that. So I started a podcast to just kind of reach out and tell people the experiences I went through to see if I can help them on their journey. So
Nice.
that's what that's about. So
Yeah,
thank you
that's
for bringing
awesome.
that up.
Everybody, make sure you go give that a listen.
Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah. All right, Michael. Well, that's it. I can't thank you enough for coming on here and sharing these amazing stories and the transformations, everything you've experienced, and giving great advice on this. So, I'm really grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart.
That concludes this edition of the Stoned Ape Reports. Thank you for listening. Please follow us on Instagram at Stoned Ape Comedy and subscribe to our newsletter at www.stonedapecomedy.com. Again, thanks for listening and catch you next time, Stoned Apes.